The first time I saw a human, I thought they were a mistake, a cosmic joke, really. Standing barely 2 meters tall, with thin skin that looked like it would tear if you breathed on it wrong, and those ridiculous little eyes that couldn't even see properly in the dark. Commander Vextal of the Krillian Empire had said they were primitives from a backwater world called Earth, and honestly, looking at Captain Marcus Kane that day, I believed him completely. "So," Kane had said, his voice carrying that peculiar human accent that made everything sound like a question, "you're telling me that your empire spans 14 star systems, commands a fleet of 10,000 warships, and has never lost a single battle in 3 centuries. Vextal's mandibles clicked in what we Krillians consider polite amusement. "That is correct, human. Perhaps now you understand why your species should consider peaceful integration into our empire. I was there as a cultural observer, recording this first contact for the Imperial Archives. Standard procedure, really. Document the primitives, catalog their weaknesses, file the report. Another Tuesday in the life of a xenobiologist." Kane had smiled then. Such a strange expression, showing those blunt white teeth. "Well, that's certainly impressive. Tell me, Commander, in all those victories, how many of your enemies fought back after you glassed their homeworlds?" The question hung in the air like a bad smell. Vextal's secondary arms twitched, a sign of confusion. "I do not understand." "Dead enemies cannot fight back, human. That is the point of killing them." Right, of course." Kane nodded slowly, still wearing that unsettling smile. "And how many of those species had, say, off-world colonies, mining operations, science stations tucked away in asteroid belts?" I remember thinking that Kane was asking oddly specific questions for a primitive, but Vextal just waved a dismissive claw. "Irrelevant details. When the homeworld falls, the species falls. This is the natural order." Kane's smile widened. "Natural order, got it. Well, Commander, I think we've learned everything we need to know about each other. That should have been my first warning." The way Kane said it, like he was filing away information rather than engaging in diplomacy. But what did I know? I was just a xenobiologist who'd seen 100 first contacts end the same way. Primitives bow, empire grows, archives get another boring entry. 3 days later, the Krillian Third Fleet arrived at Earth's solar system. 50 dreadnoughts, each one capable of cracking a planet's crust. Standard procedure: 1 warning broadcast, then orbital bombardment until the surface glowed. Clean, efficient, professional. I was aboard the flagship Dominant Fang, still in my role as observer. The bridge crew was relaxed, chatting about shore leave and promotions. After all, what could a species that had barely mastered nuclear fusion do against the might of the Krillian Empire? Admiral Korthax himself was commanding, a veteran of 97 successful conquests. His confidence radiated through his pheromone glands as he opened a channel to the planet below. "Primitive humans." His voice boomed across the communication array. "You have been selected for integration into the Krillian Empire. Surrender your military assets, submit your leaders for processing, and prepare your population for relocation. You have 1 standard hour to comply." The response came immediately. Not from any government or military command, but from a single human voice. Female, calm, with an accent I'd never heard before. "This is Dr. Elena Vasquez, speaking for the people of Earth. We acknowledge your message, Admiral. However, I'm afraid we must decline your generous offer." Korthax's mandibles clicked in amusement. "You decline? Little creature, do you comprehend what refusal means? We will turn your world into glass and vapor." "Oh, we understand perfectly," Vasquez replied, and I swear I could hear laughter in her voice. "But before you begin, I thought you might want to know about a few developments since Captain Kane's visit." That's when the tactical display lit up like a festival celebration. Asteroid belt contacts. Dozens of them, then hundreds. Energy signatures that made the ship's computers stutter and recalculate. The bridge fell silent, except for the frantic clicking of mandibles and the hum of overworked sensors. "Admiral," the sensor operator's voice cracked, "I'm reading over 3,000 discrete contacts throughout the system. They're everywhere, sir. Korthax leaned forward, his confidence wavering. Civilian mining operations. Automated platforms, nothing of military significance. That's where you're wrong, Admiral. Vasquez's voice cut through the bridge chatter like a blade. You see, when Captain Kane learned about your Empire's standard operating procedures, he shared some very interesting information with our leadership, particularly about how you prefer to glass homeworlds while ignoring off-world installations. The first salvo came from Europa, a modified ice mining laser, originally designed to cut through kilometer-thick ice sheets, that had been reconfigured into something that punched through the dominant Fang's shields like they were made of tissue paper. The beam carved a molten furrow along our starboard hull, and suddenly the bridge wasn't quite so relaxed anymore. Impossible, Korthax snarled. Primitive weapons cannot penetrate Krillian military shielding. You're absolutely right, Vasquez agreed cheerfully. Primitive weapons can't. Good thing we've had 3 days to make some improvements. That's when I realized the humans had been busy, very busy. The asteroid mining platforms opened fire next. Mass drivers designed to launch ore containers at interplanetary speeds had been retooled to hurl dense metal slugs at a significant fraction of light speed. No energy signatures to track, no heat blooms to target. Just solid chunks of iron and nickel arriving at velocities that turned Krillian armor plating into expensive confetti. The Sierra station hit us with something that made the ship's medical bay start screaming about radiation exposure. Later analysis would show they'd weaponized their fusion reactor's magnetic containment system, creating a focused beam of superheated plasma that could melt through battle armor like a hot knife through butter. But the Mars orbital platforms? Those were pure human insanity. Admiral, the tactical officer's voice was barely controlled panic. The Mars installations are launching. I don't know what they're launching, sir. On the display, dozens of objects were accelerating away from the red planet. No engine signatures, no heat trails, just acceleration, constant, impossible acceleration that violated everything I knew about physics. Solar sails, Vasquez explained helpfully. Amazing what you can accomplish when you have 3 days to strip every piece of reflective material from an entire planet's industrial base. We've been accelerating these packages since Captain Kane returned. They should be reaching you right about now. The kinetic impactors hit the Third Fleet like the fist of an angry god. Each one was just a few tons of dense metal and electronics, but they'd been accelerating for 72 hours at nearly 100 gravities. The math was simple and terrifying. Kinetic energy equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared, and when velocity gets large enough, mass becomes irrelevant. The dreadnought crushing victory simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, the next it was an expanding cloud of superheated gas and metal fragments. The merciless Talon lasted long enough to get off a distress call before a second impactor turned it into an impromptu star. This is not war, Admiral Korthax whispered, his proud voice reduced to a trembling whisper. This is madness. War? Vasquez's laugh was cold as vacuum. Oh, Admiral, this isn't war. War implies you have a chance to fight back. This is an execution. The humans had turned their entire solar system into a weapon. Every mining platform, every research station, every automated factory had been converted into an instrument of destruction in just 3 days. While the Krillian Empire had been following standard procedure, treating Earth like another primitive world to be casually conquered, the humans had been planning murder on an industrial scale. The lunar mass drivers opened up next, launching projectiles that moved fast enough to make light seem sluggish. The Jupiter system's gas harvesting operations had been converted into something that could compress atmospheric gases into projectiles dense enough to punch through starship hulls. Even the outer system research stations were getting in on the action, using gravitational slingshot maneuvers to turn ice chunks into guided missiles. I watched from the bridge of the dominant Fang as the Third Fleet, pride of the Krillian Empire, was systematically dismantled by converted civilian infrastructure. 50 dreadnoughts, each one a masterpiece of military engineering, reduced to scrap metal and painful memories. Status report, Korthax demanded. his voice barely holding together. 37 vessels destroyed, 8 heavily damaged, 5 showing engine failures, the tactical officer reported. We're taking fire from over 400 distinct positions throughout the system. Admiral, we need to retreat. Retreat? Korthax's mandibles clicked in disbelief. The Krillian Empire does not retreat from primitives. Then the Krillian Empire is about to lose a lot more ships, Vasquez commented, because we're just getting started. The humans had been listening to our communications. Of course they had. While we'd been treating this as a standard conquest, they'd been treating it as a war for survival. And when humans fight for survival, apparently they fight with everything they have. The asteroid belt platforms began moving. Not firing, moving. Massive industrial stations that had been mining asteroids for decades suddenly sprouted engine arrays and began accelerating toward the fleet. The humans were turning multi-billion-ton mining facilities into guided missiles. Admiral, I found myself speaking for the first time since the battle began. We need to leave. Now. Now. Korthax turned to look at me, his compound eyes reflecting the light of dying starships. You are a xenobiologist, not a military strategist. I'm a xenobiologist who studied over 200 species, I replied, watching another dreadnought vanish in a ball of nuclear fire. And I've never seen anything like this. They're not fighting like primitives, Admiral. They're fighting like they want to make sure we never threaten anyone again. That's when the Saturn system spoke up. Admiral Korthax, a new human voice, joined the communication channel. This one was male, older, with an accent that somehow made every word sound like a weapon. This is General Harrison Webb, commanding the Saturn defense grid. I thought you might be interested to know that we've been tracking your fleet's composition and capabilities since you entered our system. The tactical display updated with new contacts, dozens of them, scattered throughout Saturn's ring system. Each one was showing power readings that made our computers question their own sanity. You see, Webb continued conversationally, we've had observatories watching space for centuries. We know about your empire. We know about your standard tactics. We know about your other fleets. The temperature on the bridge seemed to drop several degrees. What are you implying, human? Korthax asked. I'm not implying anything, Admiral. I'm stating facts. Fleet compositions, deployment patterns, supply lines, command structures. We've been watching you for a very long time. And now, thanks to Captain Kane's reconnaissance mission, we know exactly where all your assets are located. The ring stations around Saturn were moving now, forming up into attack formations that demonstrated a level of tactical coordination that should have been impossible for a species that had never fought a space war. This was planned, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The first contact, Kane's questions, everything. They were gathering intelligence. Webb's laughter carried across the communication channel. Intelligence gathering? Son, that was recruitment. Every question Captain Kane asked, every detail your Commander Vex Tal so helpfully provided, went straight into our tactical databases. You didn't just tell us how to beat you. You volunteered the information. The Saturn ring stations fired simultaneously. Not at the Third Fleet, but past it, long-range kinetic rounds that would take days to reach their targets. But I knew, with the cold certainty of a xenobiologist who'd spent his career studying cause and effect, exactly where those rounds were headed. The Second Fleet. Korthax breathed. How did they know? We told you. Vasquez's voice was pure honey over steel. We've been watching. Your Second Fleet is currently stationed at Kepler 442, protecting your mining operations. In approximately 4 days, they're going to receive some very high-velocity visitors. Just our way of saying hello. The humans had turned their first contact into a weapon. They'd used our own arrogance against us, gathered information under the guise of diplomacy, and then converted an entire star system into a death trap in the span of 3 days. And they weren't done. Admiral, the communications officer's voice was barely controlled terror. I'm receiving transmissions from all over human space. They're launching more projectiles, hundreds of them, all targeted at Imperial installations. The display showed the terrible truth. Launch signatures from every inhabited world in human space. The humans weren't just defending their home system, they were going on the offensive. "This is insane," Korthax muttered. "A species cannot mobilize their entire civilization in 3 days." "You're right," Webb agreed. "Most species can't. But then again, most species don't face extinction-level threats with quite the same enthusiasm we do. You made one critical error, Admiral, which was, you told us you were going to kill everyone we've ever loved. Did you really think we'd limit our response to just one star system?" The remaining ships of the Third Fleet were dying around us, not in glorious battle, not in honorable combat, but in a methodical extermination carried out by converted mining equipment and improvised weapons platforms. It was efficient, brutal, and absolutely terrifying. "Admiral," I said quietly, "we need to surrender. The Krillian Empire does not surrender to primitives. The Krillian Empire is about to cease existing if we don't," I shot back. "Look at the tactical display. Look at what they've accomplished in 3 days. This isn't about primitive versus advanced anymore. This is about survival." Korthax stared at the display showing the systematic destruction of his fleet. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Krillian Empire was losing a battle, badly. "Okay, open a channel," he said finally. "Channel open, Admiral." "Human forces." Korthax's voice carried the weight of defeat. We request terms for surrender." The silence stretched for long seconds. Then Vasquez spoke, her voice carrying a note I'd never heard in any first contact scenario. "Terms? Admiral, you came here to commit genocide. You told us explicitly that you intended to turn our world into glass and vapor. And now you want to negotiate terms." The way she said it made my carapace itch with fear. We withdraw our claim on your system," Korthax offered desperately. "The Krillian Empire will leave human space and never return." "That's very generous of you," Webb's voice cut in. "Unfortunately, we have a different arrangement in mind. What do you want?" The pause that followed was filled with the sound of dying starships and the low hum of human weapons systems charging for another salvo. "Unconditional surrender," Vasquez said finally, "complete and total. Your empire, your fleets, your government, everything." "Ben, that is impossible. We cannot surrender an entire interstellar empire. Then you're going to watch it die," Webb replied with casual indifference. "Ship by ship, world by world, until there's nothing left but radioactive dust and painful memories." I looked at the tactical display one more time, saw the kinetic rounds already in flight, heading for Imperial installations across 14 star systems. Saw the launch signatures of more projectiles being fired from human space every few minutes. Saw the systematic, methodical approach of a species that had decided to solve the Krillian Empire problem permanently. The humans weren't fighting a war. They were conducting an extermination. And the most terrifying part, they were doing it with improvised weapons and converted civilian infrastructure. In 3 days. Without breaking a sweat. I had studied over 200 species in my career as a xenobiologist. I had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, the ebb and flow of galactic politics, the endless cycle of conquest and surrender that defined interstellar relations. But I had never seen anything like this. The humans weren't just defending their home. They were making sure that nothing like the Krillian Empire could ever threaten anyone again. Ever. Ever. The silence after Admiral Korthax's final transmission lasted exactly 47 seconds. I counted them, watching the chronometer tick away what I suspected might be the last moments of the Krillian Empire's existence. Around us, the bridge crew sat frozen at their stations, mandibles clicking nervously as they processed the impossible reality of their situation. Then Dr. Elena Vasquez spoke again, her voice carrying across the void with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. "You know what, Admiral? I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding here. See, when you showed up at our little blue planet with 50 dreadnoughts and started making threats about turning us into glass, you seemed to think this was some kind of negotiation." The tactical display flickered, updating with new contact signatures. Our human platforms were coming online throughout the solar system. Installations that hadn't even registered on our sensors before were suddenly broadcasting powerful targeting signals. "But here's the thing," Vasquez continued, and I could swear I heard papers rustling in the background, as if she was consulting notes. We've been studying your empire for quite some time. Not just the military capabilities that Captain Kane so cleverly extracted from your commander Vextal, but your entire social structure, your economics, your politics, your history. General Webb's voice joined the conversation. Turns out, when you've conquered 97 species over 3 centuries, you leave quite a paper trail. Archaeological evidence, survivor testimonies, refugee populations scattered across the galaxy. My breathing spiracles clenched. The humans had been conducting xenoarchaeological research on the Krillian Empire? How was that even possible for a species that had only achieved interstellar travel 50 years ago? The Zeltharian Massacre of 2687. Vasquez read, her voice taking on the clinical tone of a research presentation. Population, 4.7 billion, survivors 0. The Kythera colony purge of 2701, population, 800 million, survivors 0. The Nexus Station incident of 2715. She kept reading. Name after name, world after world, species after species. The complete catalog of Krillian conquest spanning 3 centuries. Each entry delivered in that same matter-of-fact tone that somehow made the numbers more horrifying than any emotional outburst could have. Stop, Korthax whispered. Please stop. Oh, but we're just getting to the interesting part. Webb interjected. You see, Admiral, we didn't just compile this list for academic purposes. We've been in contact with the survivors. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. Survivors? There were no survivors of Krillian conquest. That was the point. Total extinction prevented future resistance. Impossible. Korthax managed. Our records are complete. No species has ever escaped total pacification. Vasquez laughed, a sound that carried no humor whatsoever. Your records are garbage, Admiral. Did you really think that every member of every species you've encountered just happened to be conveniently located on their homeworld when you showed up? No off-world colonies? No deep space expeditions? No individuals who just happened to be visiting other star systems when you decided to commit genocide? The tactical display updated again. New signatures were appearing throughout local space. Ships. Lots of ships. But these weren't human vessels. Admiral. The sensor operator's voice cracked like breaking ceramic. I'm reading multiple fleet signatures entering the system. Unknown configurations. But, Admiral, some of these energy patterns match historical records from conquered species. The Zeltharian Deep Survey mission, Webb announced cheerfully, been operating in the galactic rim for the past 200 years. Imagine their surprise when they learned their homeworld had been glassed. They were very interested in our little conversation with Captain Kane. More ships appeared on the display. Dozens, then hundreds. Each fleet showing design characteristics that our databases identified as belonging to species that were supposed to be extinct. The Kythera nomad fleets. Vasquez continued the roll call. The Nexus Trade Consortium. The Moravian Research Foundation. The QF Mining Collective. Turns out, when you don't bother to track down every last member of a species before you murder their homeworld, some of them tend to survive and hold grudges. I stared at the display in growing horror. The humans hadn't just prepared their own solar system for war. They'd organized a coalition of the walking dead. Species that the Krillian Empire had written off as extinct were converging on our position with obvious hostile intent. This is impossible. I breathed. The logistics alone. Oh, the logistics were actually pretty straightforward, Webb replied, clearly having overheard my comment. See, it turns out that when you spend 50 years exploring space and making friends with everyone you meet, you build up quite a network of contacts. Amazing what you can accomplish when your first instinct isn't to shoot anything that doesn't look like you. The first shots came from the Zeltharian fleet, energy weapons that I recognized from historical records, but upgraded with technology that made our sensors scream warnings about power levels that shouldn't have been possible. The beam punched through the relentless tide's shields and armor like they were made of tissue paper, turning the dreadnought into a brief, bright star. The thing is, Admiral, Vasquez's voice continued over the sound of our fleet dying around us. When Captain Kane came back and told us about your standard operating procedures, we realized something important. You don't just kill species, you erase them. You wipe out their cultures, their histories, their very existence. And that made this personal. The Kethera ships opened fire next, missile swarms that moved with impossible precision, each warhead guided by artificial intelligence systems that had been refined over 2 centuries of exile. The dominant Fang shuddered as near misses overloaded our defensive systems. We could have just fortified our own system, Webb added, his voice carrying over the chaos of battle. Built bigger guns, better shields, stronger hulls, classic defensive strategy. But that would have just delayed the inevitable, wouldn't it? You'd have come back with more ships, better weapons, different tactics. Another Krillian dreadnought vanished in nuclear fire. The merciless blade, pride of the Third Fleet Strike Wing, reduced to expanding plasma by weapons that were supposed to belong to extinct species. So we decided to try a different approach, Vasquez said. Instead of just defending ourselves, we thought we'd solve the root cause of the problem permanently. Meant, the Nexus vessels were moving now, their exotic engine signatures creating gravitational distortions that made space itself seem to ripple. These weren't just warships. They were mobile superweapons, built by a species that had been perfecting their technology in hiding for over 2 centuries. Status report, Korthax demanded, his voice barely controlled. 41 vessels destroyed, 6 heavily damaged, 3 showing critical system failures, the tactical officer reported. Admiral, we have less than 10 operational dreadnoughts remaining. We're completely surrounded and outgunned by primitives and extinct species, Korthax snarled. This violates every principle of galactic warfare. Webb's laughter carried across the communication channel. Galactic warfare? Admiral, there is no galactic warfare. There's just the Krillian Empire murdering everyone it meets and calling it conquest. But that ends today. The human platforms throughout the solar system were repositioning now, coordinating with the arriving fleets in a display of tactical cooperation that should have taken years to develop. Instead, they moved like components of a single vast organism, each element supporting the others in perfect harmony. How? I found myself asking. How did you coordinate all of this? The planning alone should have taken decades. Oh, the planning did take decades, Vasquez replied. We've been expecting something like the Krillian Empire for a very long time. See, when you start exploring space and meeting other species, you quickly realize that the galaxy is a dangerous place, full of empires and conquerors and species that think might makes right. The Moravian ships were deploying some kind of exotic weapon system, energy patterns that made our sensors give up trying to classify them. Whatever they were charging up, it was drawing power equivalent to a small star. So we prepared, Webb continued. Not just for war, but for the kind of war that ends wars. The kind of conflict that makes sure aggressors think twice before starting something they can't finish. The remaining Krillian vessels were trying to form a defensive perimeter, but it was hopeless. We were surrounded by enemies on all sides, outnumbered 50-1, and facing weapon systems that had been refined specifically to counter Krillian military technology. You cannot destroy an entire interstellar empire, Korthax protested, desperation clear in his voice. The logistics are impossible. The resources required are considerable, Vasquez agreed. Fortunately, we've had some help. Turns out that when you've spent 3 centuries making enemies, those enemies are very motivated to provide assistance to anyone willing to do something about the problem. The display updated with more contact signatures. These weren't ships. They were something else entirely, massive structures moving through space at velocities that should have torn them apart, heading directly for the outer boundaries of Krillian space. Mobile construction platforms, Webb explained helpfully, built by the QF mining collective over the past century, designed to construct deep space installations in hostile environments. We've made some modifications to the original design parameters. I watched in growing horror as the tactical computer calculated the trajectories of those massive structures. They were heading for every major Krillian world simultaneously. It's not to attack them, but to build something in their vicinity. What are you building? I whispered. Prisons, Vasquez replied simply. Very large, very secure prisons. See, we've decided that the Krillian Empire has committed enough genocide for 1 millennium. Time for a career change. The Moravian weapon systems fired. Not at our ships, but at something else entirely. The beams lanced out toward empty space, striking targets that weren't there, except they were there. Cloaked surveillance stations, hidden monitoring posts, secret supply depots, the entire invisible infrastructure that allowed the Krillian Empire to coordinate across 14 star systems. You've been tracking our covert operations? Ed, Korthax asked, his voice hollow with defeat. For over 30 years, Webb confirmed. Amazing what you can spot when you're not limited to visible light spectrum observation. Your stealth technology is impressive, but it doesn't work against gravitational sensors or quantum entanglement detectors or biosignature analyzers tuned to Krillian pheromone signatures. The humans and their allies weren't just winning this battle. They were dismantling the entire Krillian Empire's ability to function as a coordinated force, communication networks, supply lines, command structures, intelligence operations, everything that made interstellar conquest possible. This is madness, I breathed, watching centuries of Imperial infrastructure being systematically destroyed. This is justice, Vasquez corrected, delayed but not denied. The last few Krillian dreadnoughts were surrendering now, their crews apparently having reached the same conclusion I had. The Third Fleet, pride of the Imperial Navy, was finished, but more than that, the Krillian Empire itself was finished. Final offer. Admiral, Webb's voice cut through the chaos. Unconditional surrender. Complete disarmament. War crimes tribunals for anyone involved in genocide. Permanent monitoring to ensure compliance with galactic civilization standards. And if we refuse? Korthax asked. Then we finish what you started. Vasquez replied, except we'll be much more thorough than you ever were. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. These humans and their allies weren't bluffing. They had the capability to carry out total extinction of the Krillian species, and they demonstrated the will to use it. We accept, Korthax whispered. Excellent, Webb said brightly. Captain Kane will be handling the details of your surrender. I believe you remember him? Kane's voice joined the communication channel, carrying that same unsettling friendliness he'd shown during first contact. Hello again, Admiral. Ready to discuss those peaceful integration terms now? I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The irony was too perfect. The humans had used our own diplomatic language against us, turning the Krillian Empire's standard conquest procedures into their own surrender terms. Something amusing, xenobiologist? Korthax asked coldly. We called them primitives. I managed between fits of laughter. Primitives, a species that organized a galaxy-spanning coalition, converted an entire star system into a weapons platform, and dismantled a 3-century-old empire in less than a week. And we called them primitives. Kane's chuckle carried across the channel. Well, to be fair, we are pretty primitive. We've only been in space for 50 years. Give us another century or two, and we might actually become scary. The surrender proceedings took another 6 hours to complete. By the time we were transferred to human custody, the full scope of their operation was becoming clear. The Krillian Empire hadn't just lost a battle or even a war. We'd been completely and permanently neutralized as a threat to galactic peace. The mobile construction platforms were already building prison facilities throughout Imperial space, not death camps or extermination centers, but actual prisons designed for long-term incarceration and rehabilitation. The humans were planning to keep us alive, under supervision, until we learned to coexist peacefully with other species. Why? I asked Kane during the processing interview. Why not just kill us all? It would be simpler. Kane considered the question seriously before answering. Because killing you would make us no better than you were. Besides, dead civilizations can't learn from their mistakes, and if we refuse to learn... Kane's smile was gentle, but his eyes were cold as vacuum. Then your children will have the opportunity to make better choices, and their children after them. We're very patient people, Dr. Thekvar. We can wait as long as it takes. 6 months later, I was assigned to a research facility on the human colony world of New Geneva. My job was to help compile a comprehensive history of Krillian conquest, working with survivors from dozens of supposedly extinct species to create a complete record of imperial atrocities. It was during this work that I finally understood what the humans had actually accomplished. They hadn't just defeated the Krillian Empire. They'd created a new model for galactic civilization, one based on cooperation instead of conquest, preservation instead of destruction, justice instead of might. The galaxy would never be the same. And honestly, that was probably for the best. The humans had kept their promise. They'd solved the Krillian Empire problem permanently, not through genocide or extinction, but through something far more powerful and lasting. They'd given the galaxy hope that monsters could be stopped, that victims could find justice, that civilizations could choose cooperation over conquest and survival over supremacy. War. No, this hadn't been war. This had been the birth of a better galaxy. Iprolinor and the humans, those supposedly primitive little creatures from a backwater world called Earth, had been its midwives.